All right, well, again, thank you all for being here. My name is Andy Pindoli. I'll be serving as our meeting facilitator here tonight. Before we get too far into the program, I'd like to go ahead and introduce Diana Orozco, who is serving as our Spanish language interpreter tonight. Diana is going to help kick things off with an announcement about our Spanish language service tonight. Diana, thank you.
Thank you, Andy. Good afternoon and welcome to this meeting. In order to provide language access, this meeting will have simultaneous interpretation from English to Spanish. Please note that the interpretation globe will not appear until I've read through all language instructions. Therefore, we are asking that everyone joining us for this event, please select your preferred language to facilitate hearing presenters and participants clearly and to prevent technical glitches or interference occurring between the two language channels when one is not selected. If you're on your laptop, please locate the icon shaped like a globe at the bottom of your screen that will show up after I've given these instructions. Click on language interpretation and then select English. If you're on an iPad or your phone or a similar device, then please locate the three-dot menu on the right corner of your screen. Click on language interpretation and then select English. When you speak, please do so at a moderate pace because the interpreter is going to be simultaneously interpreting everything you say. Buenas tardes a todos y bienvenidos a esta reunión. Esta reunión contará con interpretación simultánea en inglés y español. El globo de interpretación no va a aparecer sino hasta que yo haya leído las instrucciones en inglés y en español. Por lo tanto, pedimos que todos los presentes seleccionen su idioma preferido para facilitar la escucha de los presentadores y de los participantes con claridad, evitando que se produzcan fallas técnicas o interferencias entre los canales lingüísticos cuando no se selecciona alguno de estos. Si está usando una computadora, va a haber un icono en la parte inferior de su pantalla a la derecha en forma de globo que dice Interpretation, es decir, interpretación. Haga clic ahí y seleccione Spanish, es decir, español. Si está utilizando un iPad o teléfono inteligente, favor de localizar el menú de 3 puntos que aparece arriba en la parte de abajo a la derecha. Haga clic en Language Interpretation, es decir, interpretación de idiomas, y elija Spanish, español. Cuando sea su turno de hablar, por favor recuerde hablar con voz fuerte y clara y a un paso moderado, ya que yo estaré interpretando simultáneamente al otro idioma. Thank you, Andy.
Diana, thank you very much. So as noted, please do indicate the language, especially including English, if you'll be listening in English language. I also want to let you know tonight about how we'll be, the opportunities for you to be able to provide your comments and questions during the meeting tonight. And there's 2 major ways that we do that using the Zoom tool. First of all is with the Zoom chat as well. So that's where you can, as many of you are familiar, you can type in your comments and questions into the Zoom chat for all to see and read. That's a great way for us to receive your comments because it immediately records it for us, which we really value as part of our note-taking tonight. So I do want to stress that and encourage your use of that, but also let you know too that if you prefer to speak over the audio when we get to the comment period, you can use the raise hand feature to indicate to us that you'd like to go on the microphone and speak to the group. So we welcome that. You can use the raise hand feature to do that. If you have any problems accessing the raise hand feature, you can also type into the chat that you'd like to speak over the audio, and then we can make sure you can do that as well. And then for anybody who is accessing on their smartphone right now tonight, just showing on screen here, you can click probably your menu at the bottom has a more button with 3 dots. And if you click on that, you'll find the chat and the raise hand functions there. So just want to make sure everybody's oriented to that. Now, with those details out of the way, we want to go ahead and more broadly welcome you and thank you for being here tonight. Tonight is one of our series of community meetings for the Regional Decarbonization Framework. This is really an important and exciting collaborative effort, focusing on lowering the entire region's carbon footprint here in the entirety of San Diego County. So we have tonight's kind of a check-in point, we call it, I think is one way to look at it. It's kind of an update to the community. We've had a lot of engagement opportunities just in the last 6 to 8 weeks alone, but even reaching further back. And what we want to do tonight is kind of take a moment to reflect on a lot of data that's been presented through a lot of workshops in recent weeks, but also a lot of the feedback, a lot of the comments and questions and reflections that we've been hearing from community members related to that data. And it's an opportunity to just kind of pause and start to reflect on that and make sure we're answering any further questions that any of you may have tonight or the broader community as we think about starting to pivot and move forward towards looking more intentionally at implementation pathways. Now that we have plenty of data to understand what's the state of our region and the opportunities, how can we act on those? So those conversations are coming up in the weeks and months ahead. So today's kind of a good point to pause and check in, as we look ahead to doing that. So we look forward to engaging on that. So in terms of the agenda, what we'll do is we will hear a presentation from the Regional Decarbonization Framework team. And it's going to be about a 20-minute presentation. We'll go straight through hearing those slides. We have a lot of information to share. Just want to thank you in advance for your patience. There's going to be a lot of content on the slides to share with you, a lot to share over the speaking points. So we appreciate you listening in and weighing in. We'll be happy afterwards to circle back and clarify anything that you may have heard or not heard, as the case may be. But we're going to dedicate the bulk of our time tonight to hearing from you. We have team members here ready and happy to answer any questions they can with the information they have tonight. But also, to hear your thoughts. We have questions for you to kind of check in with you about your impressions as to the state of this process and where we are and what you see moving forward and what we collectively need to do, to continue to make progress. So, that's what we'll be doing. So again, want to thank you for being here. Thank you for in a moment we're going to launch right into the presentation. Thanks for your time and attention to that. And on the other end of that presentation, we're going to open it up to be able to hear from everybody. We have as late as 8 p.m. tonight. If we have that much that you'd like to cover and talk about during the Q&A period, but we'll also be happy to wrap up earlier if we get to hear from everybody and get to hear all the comments before that. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and introduce Elise Hansen, and she is part of the Regional Decarbonization Framework team. And she's going to be presenting this series of slides now, giving you a summary of a lot of data we've been hearing and takeaways, but again, also some of the input and feedback we've been hearing from the community. So with that, let me go ahead and Elise, bring her up.
Great. Thanks, Andy. So my name is Elise Hansen, and I'm a management fellow in the county's Land Use and Environment Group, or LUGE, working in the executive office. So we'll start by looking at our timeline. So this is our timeline. We began the modeling work last summer and released an initial draft of the technical report in the fall, after which we went to the board, took public comments, and had a technical working group provide an extensive review. The report authors then revised the drafts in response to the comments. Since then, we have received a revised draft of the technical report and a draft of the workforce report. With these, we now have an understanding of where we are as a region, and we are beginning the process of implementation design. From now through August, we will continue to work on the workforce development study and the implementation pathways. In August, we are tentatively scheduled to go to the board for a hearing to provide an update. The engagement website is the central location for commenting on the documents that have open comment periods through May 31st. The full technical report, the summary for policymakers, and the workforce report. Additionally, the website allows users to ask questions, suggest ideas, and connect with the project team. So our outreach and engagement up until this point has been focused on the following. Community meetings, which are large public meetings to inform a broad audience about the RDF process, findings, and progress. These will continue through the summer. Sector workshops, which were deeper dives into the technical report's findings with chapter authors. These are completed, and the recordings of the workshops are available on the county's RDF website and through the LUGE Executive Office's YouTube channel. Presentations to City Council and tribal governments. These are brief presentations of the RDF to city councils and tribal governments throughout the region to inform leaders about the RDF's goals and progress so far and to foster interjurisdictional collaboration. And finally, presentations to and engagement with private stakeholders. These have been one-on-one meetings, presentations to governing bodies of NGOs, industry groups, advocacy groups, tribal representatives, and community sponsor groups. We'll now go into more detail about each of these engagement types and a high-level overview of the feedback received through these events. So we'll start with community meetings. This is our third community meeting, with our previous two meetings being on March 24th and April 19th. At these two events, there were about 200 attendees representing a variety of organizations, industries, stakeholder groups, labor unions, and advocacy groups, in addition to numerous individuals who attended as members of the community. The RDF team gained substantial insights from the comments provided in these meetings, which will be passed on to study authors and will help to inform implementation discussions moving forward. Among the many comments received, some themes emerged from these larger presentations. First, equity needs to be central to the integrated regional decarbonization framework. The technical report and workforce reports both considered equity, but as Chapter 8 of the technical report found, the region can benefit from a specific focus on equity while it decarbonizes. Second, many stakeholders noted that implementing decarbonization should focus on underserved populations. These could be communities that are low income, have high rates of home rental and low rates of home ownership, are disadvantaged, are remote and have low access to public services like transit, or are currently bearing or have historically borne disproportionately high rates of pollution or other environmental harms. Policies can be crafted to help these communities to decarbonize and reap the economic and environmental co-benefits. Third, there was broad interest in how regional collaboration on issues of decarbonizing transportation, electricity generation, and buildings, as well as investing in natural climate solutions, can lead to greater climate benefits than if any jurisdiction acted independently. Additionally, it was stated that regional collaboration can foster broader and more equitable public education, which would in turn foster greater collaboration. Fourth, there were several comments that expressed interest in investigating climate change-related issues beyond reducing carbon dioxide emissions. In particular, there was interest in studying embodied carbon, as well as methane emissions from natural gas, landfills, wastewater treatment plants, and other sources. Further, there was interest in reducing the carbon dioxide emissions from the other 20% of regional emissions not included in transportation, electricity generation, and buildings. Next, the sector workshops focused on the 4 decarbonization pathways: electricity generation, transportation, buildings, and natural climate solutions, as well as workshops that focused on diving deeper on both the agricultural sector and the job sector. Now I'll go over a summary of the key findings presented at these workshops, a list of the organizations, jurisdictions, and groups represented in the registered participants, and the broad themes of the workshop feedback. These will be presented chronologically in the order in which they were held. So we'll start with the electricity workshop. The key takeaways that were presented are that this chapter of the technical report provides pathways to meet projected electricity demand using 100% renewable, scalable, and proven electricity. And additionally, the chapter provided numerous scenarios that attempted to reach projected 2050 regional energy demand under different constraints and objectives, and that these scenarios are not prescriptive and are not recommendations. Here's a list of the groups, organizations, and jurisdictions that registered for the workshop. We had representation from cities, business, labor, community, and environmental groups. In terms of feedback received, participants expressed support for different sources of renewable energy. They asked questions about assumptions and analyses, and commented on the intersection of energy siting and jobs. On screen are a handful of themes from the comments that we received. Our second workshop focused on natural climate solutions and land use. This chapter's key takeaways were presented are that the San Diego region's natural and working lands have large stores of carbon storage and sequester large amounts of carbon annually. There are numerous opportunities to increase and protect natural carbon dioxide sequestration and storage. that natural climate solutions have environmental, health, social, and economic co-benefits, and that equity and environmental justice should be key considerations. Here's a list of the registered groups, organizations, and jurisdictions. This represents a broad range of interests. Feedback from this workshop fell into some of the broad themes listed on this slide and the following slide. Overall, there were comments both on the natural climate solutions portion of the presentation and on the land use portion of the presentation. There was considerable interest in analyzing natural climate solutions on agricultural and working lands, especially carbon farming and other agricultural natural climate solutions, from both a carbon perspective and an economic and livelihood perspective. Our third workshop was on transportation, and the key takeaways that were presented are that the chapter provides pathways to meet state-mandated carbon neutrality goals for transportation, that the existing policy landscape is strong, but that current policies are insufficient to meet state requirements, and that transportation policies can be more effective, both in terms of emissions reductions and in terms of helping people to move around the region when designed from a regional perspective. Here's a list of those who registered. And once again, the breadth of input that we received during the workshop reflected this broad participation. Feedback from this workshop included the themes shown on this slide and the following slide. There was strong interest in discussing both the electric vehicle and the vehicle miles traveled portions of the presentation during this workshop. Overall, there was significant stated interest in rapidly and equitably decarbonizing the transportation sector in the region. In addition to the natural climate solutions and land use sector workshop, we held a meeting with the agricultural community to focus on the agriculture sector and the food system. Some of the key takeaways that were presented are that carbon farming can sequester and store large amounts of atmospheric carbon while simultaneously producing local food and providing important co-benefits like improved water and air quality, lower water and fertilizer inputs, higher crop yields, and more. Second, that other carbon farming and restoration techniques and operations not included in this analysis may be important for both increased carbon sequestration and for co-benefits that are worth further study. And finally, that equity and farmer input / feedback should be central to structuring incentives. About 40 participants registered for this workshop, including representatives from the Farm Bureau, the Greater San Diego County Resource Conservation District, Food Shed, and Carbon Sink Farms, as well as individual farmers, ranchers, and greenhouse managers, and others in the agricultural industry. We received detailed feedback from this workshop and heard directly from practitioners about the integrated RDF. Some of the feedback that we received has been on these two slides, but broadly, the comments were focused, specific, and geared towards equitable implementation of natural climate solutions in the agricultural sector that support farmers, ranchers, land managers, and other agricultural workers, and maintain the region's agricultural viability. Our fourth workshop was on buildings, and the key takeaways presented were that the chapter modeled pathways to zero on-site building emissions under 3 scenarios, that electrifying space and water heating in new and existing buildings will be key to decarbonizing residential and commercial buildings, and that electrification policies should focus on equity. Here's a list of those who registered and provided feedback, which again represents a broad range of interests. Feedback from this workshop included the themes shown on this slide. There was a broad understanding that building decarbonization would occur primarily through electrification of space and water heating, and that attendees asked clarifying questions about the assumptions underlying the analyses and about the scenarios analyzed in the chapter. There was also discussion of the intersection of building electrification and jobs. In addition to our 4 sector workshops and the agriculture workshop, we also held a jobs workshop to specifically discuss the jobs chapter of the technical report and the workforce report. Key takeaways from this workshop include that billions of dollars are anticipated to be invested in energy demand and supply industries, resulting in tens of thousands of new jobs created annually. Second, that job and work characteristics will vary. And finally, that there are numerous examples of possible policies from the state and federal levels to support high road green jobs resulting from climate investments. Here's a list of our registered groups, organizations, and jurisdictions. As with the other sectors, we had representation from cities, business, labor, community, and environmental groups. Feedback for this workshop included the themes shown on this slide. Attendees asked clarifying questions on the assumptions underlying both the analyses in the technical report and in the workforce report of their respective authors. Additionally, attendees commented on the intersections of these employment, quantity, and quality findings with the other chapters of the RDF's technical report. In addition to the community meetings and the sector workshops, the RDF team has reached out to all the cities in the region with an offer to present to city councils. So far, the team has presented to 6 city councils in the following cities: Chula Vista, Del Mar, Encinitas, Imperial Beach, Lemon Grove, and Santee. The RDF team will present to Solana Beach next week. Additionally, the team will present to the City of San Diego's Environment Committee later this month. The RDF team fielded questions from mayors, council members, and the public at these meetings, and a few themes emerged. First, many of the city councils responded favorably regarding the need for regional collaboration to address climate change. Among the cities that the team has presented to so far, there is an emerging consensus for cities and the county to work together in order to solve ambitious climate goals that none of us can solve on our own. Second, some elected officials expressed that they wanted flexibility in their collaboration. They were eager to be at the table and to participate in regional decarbonization, but they did not want the decarbonization actions to be prescribed to them or for regional standards to be imposed upon them. Third, there were questions about next steps in implementation and interest in monthly check-ins. Fourth, there were suggestions that an economic analysis would help jurisdictions to agree to decarbonization because it may be difficult to invest in infrastructure, new technology, and natural climate solutions when the economic analysis is not yet on paper. Fifth, some elected city officials expressed that there needs to be more public awareness and education about the climate emergency and that the need for collective action. Sixth, one aspect of collaboration that seems especially important to city councils and mayors is that the region can attract more funding together than jurisdictions can attract on their own. As one mayor put it, the economic incentives for a city to invest in EV needs to be correctly aligned because the city is also trying to do things like prevent evictions and address other social issues. Together, jurisdictions can seek state and federal funding and help cities with few resources to decarbonize and to maintain other social services. Throughout the outreach and engagement process, the county's RDF team has been presenting to and meeting with numerous stakeholders and stakeholder groups for more tailored discussions, one-on-one meetings, and individualized presentations. These meetings have allowed for stakeholders from different communities, industries, and backgrounds to discuss the RDF with the team and to stay engaged in the process. These meetings have also included meetings with city staff across the region and with the Southern California Tribal Association. There have been over 70 meetings so far, and many more are scheduled or planned in the coming months. Additionally, the RDF team has received 3 comment letters so far in the comment period. Together, this feedback has generally mirrored the feedback received in the public outreach events, though there has been more opportunity and time for more nuanced comments and for more direct question and answer in these meetings. These meetings have been an invaluable way for our team to hear comments from a broad audience and to engage regional stakeholders in the RDF comment and feedback process. So we want to thank everyone for bringing your ideas and questions to past workshops and sector-specific workshops. The comments, questions, and suggestions that came from these stakeholder events will be collected, organized, and sent to the study authors for consideration as they draft the next technical and workforce reports. Additionally, the feedback from stakeholder events will help us in our next steps for implementation pathways, which will be the specific projects, policies, and programs to decarbonize our region. For next steps and upcoming deadlines, the finalized drafts of the RDF technical report and workforce report will be released in July of this year. Ahead of those deadlines, the comment period will end on May 31st. Please provide your final comments to the RDF team by May 31st to ensure that they are given to the study authors. Comments can be provided through email to the Zero Carbon email address or through the engagement website. Throughout the comment period and the implementation phase and beyond, we will continue to hold public outreach events. This public outreach plan consists of completed, ongoing, and planned events, meetings, and discussions. The sector meetings were completed earlier this month, and the recordings are available on the project website. Community gatherings like this one are continuing monthly, and there are opportunities to discuss the integrated RDF with a broader audience. Community learning sessions will occur monthly based on requests by partners and district anchor CBOs. Direct engagement meetings and presentations are ongoing, and there are opportunities to have one-on-one conversations with stakeholders. Pop-up community events are also ongoing and will be opportunities to educate a general audience by going into the community. And finally, regional convenings for implementation will be events with public officials and stakeholders with a goal of co-designing the implementation pathways, and these will be held in early 2023. We want to thank you all so much for participating in the RDF's outreach events. We are grateful for your input and feedback in shaping this important regional effort. I'll now hand it back to Andy to facilitate our Q&A and discussion.
Very good. Thank you, Elise, for that overview. As you can see, a lot of ground's been covered. There's a lot more to be covered, though, coming forward. And this is, again, tonight's a great opportunity just to kind of check in and reflect on everything we've heard and learned so far and have a conversation around that. In a moment, I'm going to bring Mirza Baksimusa on just for a few words before we open up to all of you. But it just is a quick reminder about how you can now engage and have conversation during our meeting. Again, we really appreciate use of the chat. You're welcome to include comments and questions there, and we can respond to them and answer them over audio and in the chat. But you're also welcome to speak over the audio as well. If you can use the raise hand feature in Zoom, that will be helpful to us, and I can call on you and make sure you can unmute yourself. And again, for those of you on a smartphone, you'll find those features pushing the more button, and they should appear to you that way. So with that, though, I do want to, excuse me, Mirza, if you can come on. I know you want to talk a little bit more about kind of where we are at this point in the process, and a little bit more about kind of, you know, as a milestone point in the process before we open up for conversation.
Thank you, Andy. As Elise covered, there was a pretty broad participation, and our team wants to express their sincerest gratitude for your time, for the public's time, and stakeholders that have been involved in this. Many of them for quite a while were quite encouraged by the support we have received in terms of the framework. And we really think that the success of this framework depends on the active participation by the community. It's been about a year since we've been working on this, and we've been making steady progress in completing the analysis. As Elise mentioned, we're going to the board with an update. We want to make sure that the technical analysis is sound. Nonetheless, we're really excited about the next phase, which is implementation. And the success of implementation depends on active participation by all of us working together. We want to continue to engage. We want to bring more people into this conversation. We would like you to go bring your colleagues, friends, leaders in the community, neighbors into this discussion, because climate change affects us all, and the success of us working collaboratively depends on our active participation. That I'll turn it back to Andy.
Yeah, to that end, Mirza, thank you. Actually, a question from Sonia. Thanks for being here again. Good to see you again. Question in the chat. She's asking, what's the best way to schedule more of one of those kind of more one-on-one based engagement meeting? I would imagine emailing to the Zero Carbon email address. Is that correct?
Our team will be glad to follow up, Sonia. And we're here. We're gonna take notes, and we're gonna make sure that we follow up with you. We also want to make sure that wherever there's a request, we want to make sure that you have the information that you need to go out into your community and talk about this.
Right. Very good. All right. Thank you. And so to that end, again, want to open up as you kind of see this question on screen to those who can see it, or if you can't for any reason, just want to let you know, we just check in with all of you. What kind of questions or reflections do you have about the key takeaways? At least gave you a summary of the key takeaways of each sector. And then also about the community engagement findings, the feedback we've been hearing, right? Some of it has come from people on this meeting tonight. I see a lot of familiar faces. So as we step back and look at, this journey we've been taking together so far, what reflections do you have that you'd like to share that you think are important for us to think about at this point, and as we start to pivot and looking ahead more to implementation? So, happy to hear from all of you in the chat or in the, if anybody would like to speak over the audio, would love to hear from you with those questions. Let me introduce another question, just to further spur your thinking. We know, I think all of you here we're under no illusions that achieving a decarbonized region, a decarbonized San Diego region and county will be a long-term effort. This will not happen overnight. It will not happen in 1 year or in just 5. It's going to take many strategies across many sectors to make this work and make this happen. So, but nevertheless, we have to take a first step. So to begin our collective efforts, what are first steps that you believe could provide immediate benefits for the entire region? Again, granted, immediate steps won't, create all the immediate solutions that we need, but we can start to make some good progress. What are some things that you think, some immediate steps that you think could be helpful? Get us some people call it kind of almost like the low-hanging fruit, right? Where we can start to make some good progress and overall to show that we can work together to get some good results and have some meaningful impact in communities. What are your thoughts as to what some of those early steps would be? I'd love to hear from all of you about that. Any and all of you about those questions overall. And another question we have for tonight as well, by the way, what are first steps that will have immediate benefits to underserved communities, with an equity lens? Where do we want to be very intentional in thinking about, again, the impacts that we know have been there and continue to be there today, historically, today, and then we anticipate continuing in the future. What are some immediate steps and benefits we can foresee for communities in need? And thanks. So I see some initial comments. Thank you, Melanie and Brian and Nancy. Overall, the freight system, the port, absolutely electrifying the port there and that entire system. New gas stations, how we're improving, either slow down approval or stop approval, as Brian's suggesting. And thinking about express lanes and how those are used or not used or allowed to be used. And then natural carbon sequestration through land use, as Nancy mentioned. Thank you, Nancy. Absolutely. There's been a lot of extensive conversations so far about the data that's been uncovered by the team and what that can look like, how we can implement that practically and meaningfully here. So excellent. Thank you. Good. And would love to hear from others too about thoughts about what those immediate steps are, what you think are things that could take action on kind of figuratively tomorrow, right? Really start making that progress and start seeing some results sooner than later, to start making the progress that we know we need to make and we know will need to be sustained in the long term. So good. So another question, just to further spur your thinking and thoughts and ideas. Um, what are specific underserved communities in our region? We've had this conversation a bit in some of these meetings, those of you who've attended, and we certainly have some good kind of building conversation around that and thinking about specific groups. Well, we'd like to reflect on that again with you. Who are specific underserved communities in our region, and that might be by location, because by virtue of literally where they're located in our region, but also by representation. And or by representation, I should say, that kind of lack of voice in the process, or don't have as strong a voice, and who could be trusted messengers and representatives that can assist in meaningful engagement in these communities. So good, I start to see some comments coming in, and Sonia, good to see you again. Thank you for being here. You've offered a lot here with this question that I just brought up. Would definitely appreciate you bringing more thoughts and ideas here. What did you want to share with the group tonight?
Hi, Andy. Thank you for giving me a chance to speak. And hi, county team. I think you guys are doing a great job. Appreciate the work and effort putting on this. So I know, I mean, because the county is multi-cities, right? We have multiple different jurisdictions, but just to kind of provide an example for the city of San Diego, typically those are city districts 4, 8, and 9. Representations of what we normally refer to as communities of concern, right? So providing that definition, I appreciate that you're even eliciting that, how are we going to define that? So using, as you mentioned here, those that are normally not decision makers, representation. So I would say BIPOC communities, which is Black, Indigenous, people of color, Black and Brown communities. And so they're typically, and I don't want to only focus on the city of San Diego, but that is the example I just want to provide just from the inquiry that you asked, that, when you look at socioeconomic status, when you look at those that have more of the burden of climate injustice on their shoulders, but have contributed the least, right? So I'm going to a national climate equity and climate justice convening representing the national NAACP in Florida here in a couple weeks. So when I get back, I'm sure I'll be able to provide some more input and email with that information.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. And I do have one other question.
Please.
Any input that you guys received, I'm just curious. Have you guys actually made any adjustments or alterations to what you originally put out based on, out of all of the workshops you received input? I'm just curious, has any of the input made any adjustments?
Thank you. Yeah, thank you for that question. And Murders, I know will come on.
Yeah.
I'll offer a starting point to that response. I do want to stress too tonight, speaking of all the input we received, and Elise gave you a pretty, on some level, extensive summary of what we've heard. But on another level, it truly does scratch the surface of all the great input we've heard. We've gone into such great depths in these community meetings and in the sector workshops. And I do want to let everybody know, the RDF team continues to work through all that input. I think it's safe to say, Murders, I know will either clarify or correct me here, but all that input, for instance, Sonia, that we've heard, I mean, you've been part of many of those meetings, still being kind of processed, right? And still being considered about how does this inform our policy, our implementation pathway considerations. Because I think it's definitely, I know it's safe to say nothing's been certainly decided yet. There's no policy in place yet and things like that. So, but all that input will start to help to inform that. But Murders, I'll let you pick up there and clarify more about that.
Yes, thank you, Andy. Sonia, thank you for that question. The reason we had an extended period of input from, I believe, beginning of February through the end of May is because we wanted to make sure that we got to this level of community engagement on a substantive level rather than just put out a document and have folks comment on it. It really was to make sure that we actually heard what folks were saying. And at the same time, we also want to make sure that cities and agencies, more of them actually heard and participated in it, because that too was a critical piece we were initially wanting more of. I think we've accomplished that at this time in terms of the substantive, including your own in the group, the community, I forget the name, sorry, Sonia, that you brought in. It was really community power. Was that the group?
It's Protect Our Community Foundation.
Protect Our Community Foundation.
Yeah.
Thank you. So we have, we're in the process of processing all the different comments we are going to receive until the end of May. During this time that was the open comment period, we did not put out any revisions so that there is no confusion about what it is in terms of the document that we're referring to. After the comment period is closed on May 31st, then we're going to go over all the comments with every single author. And in the same way as we did last time, try to correlate the different comments with the different authors, and so have them respond. We expect the final version of this technical framework, which will include the local policy opportunity analysis, as well as the workforce development study, to all be complete in July. So we have sufficient time before we go to the board with an update in August, at the end of August. Yeah.
Good. Yeah. Thank you, Mirza, for going through that, and for everyone to know that. And we'll further clarify this even before we wrap up tonight. But the public comment period on the technical documents, which the deadline is May 31st, that does not mean public comment and public involvement in this entire process ends. It's simply just on that initial technical material coming from the team. So please know that the public engagement overall, community engagement, does not end on May 31st in this process. There's much more to come, and we have to begin conversation about what implementation looks like. So do know that. We do want to make sure we clarify that. That said, we definitely do want to make sure we get the public comment in on the technical documents by May 31st. So please do look forward to that. We'll be putting those links in the chat again here shortly, and then again before we leave tonight. So good. And I also wanted, speaking of the chat, I wanted to acknowledge and thank. More comments have come in that have come in, and no idea is too small, no idea is too big either at this point. Nancy mentioned, for example, I'm sorry, Melanie mentioned, excuse me, Melanie, gas leaf blowers, right? Gas powered leaf blowers, those are small but not insignificant in terms of their impact as well, for example. So, but suggestions about, really funding it, building electrification in underserved communities as a potential strategy. Again, that knowing that the vast majority of the buildings that are standing today will be standing 30 years from now. And so it's going to, when we talk about buildings, a lot of that will be about retrofit of existing buildings. So need to think about, how we can support funding of those as needed, and at least in certain communities or in certain contexts. And then also too, I'm seeing the comments as well about, as much as we may be continuing to build more dense multifamily housing, which is a key part of more towards decarbonization, we also have to be thoughtful about and intentional and around ensuring there's supporting open space, right? Especially in those communities that are taking more of that density in overall. So that's good. And then I see a question. I'd like the team members here, Mirza, if you can see in the chat, there's a specific question that recently came in, and we'll certainly get to about kind of clarifying the measures around the proposed policy actions, which again, David, Edic, thank you for the comment. There are not yet proposed policy actions, just to clarify for you, but is there data on cost per ton of CO2 eliminated or cost per ton per year for multi-year implementations? And cash flow data, what do we have so far about data along those lines? But I also appreciate, it sounds like the underlying part of your questions are, this can be data that can be helpful to informing policy decisions, essentially. Mirza, can you give at least some initial response to David's questions?
I'll give an initial response and see if Elise has something to add about the modeling itself.
Great.
So as you mentioned, Andy, we are at the stage of having completed a technical analysis that shows the pathways for getting to zero carbon emissions in 2045, which is what IPCC recommends for our region in terms of what can we do for each of these key emitting sectors in terms of the trajectory over time. Now, out of that, in terms of the actual emissions, will come the policy measures intended to implement in order to effectuate that particular level of emissions. We do have some ideas that in the past have all been implemented elsewhere in a feasible and scalable manner. But nonetheless, for the County of San Diego, we do not have recommendations at this time. So therefore, we have not come to that place of can we do a cost benefit analysis, because we do not have the measures that particularly pertain to implementation of these policies. I'll turn it to Elise in terms of how cost was a factor in the modeling itself.
My understanding of the models that were underlying the technical report is that costs of CO2 were not incorporated. Costs of some other things, for instance, in the buildings chapter, there were some fairly extensive cost analyses of the different systems. And those were particularly important for understanding kind of the projected adoption rates for different systems. But the cost per ton of carbon was not included, to my knowledge, in the technical report.
Thank you for that initial response. So definitely would encourage David and others who are interested in more details on the cost. They have a great detailed question there. Please, if you haven't had a chance yet to explore the detailed findings, please do. And again, and even offline, be happy to talk to you in more detail if needed, even outside of the community meeting, about the underlying assumptions in the model and those data sources. If you're not finding your answer in the report, so good. Yeah, thank you for that. And then I wanted to acknowledge too, B mentioned electrification extending to agriculture equipment as well, and that yes, B, thank you for being part of previous meetings. There a lot of input so far related to agriculture related opportunities are on the table. So thanks to you and others for contributing to that. And then back on the transportation side, Brian's got a concern, about how as we're seeing more express lanes on our highway system coming online, that these aren't just focused on there's grave concern about them being just kind of focused on people who can afford them more, and not being as focused on their potential opportunity to perform more cleaner transportation. So Brian, point well taken. Thank you for that. And then Sonia, your point as well that underserved communities should be the first point of implementation and benefits around decarbonization. So thank you for making that point. We appreciate that. I've definitely been hearing that from others as well throughout this process, and we know we hear from policymakers that is of great importance to them as well. So very good. So yeah, thank you all for these comments and questions coming in. We appreciate that, and definitely want to encourage and let you know too. Again, we can go as late as 8 p.m. tonight if the commentary and flow and questions are continuing to come in apace. But also let you know too that if tonight's kind of just a check-in point anyway. That if we wrap up early, that's certainly fine, and we're happy to close the meeting, let you get back to your evening as well. So just want to let you know about that as well. So. But I see larger comment here from Albert. Thank you. Let's see. I apologize, Albert. I haven't read. I see it's an extensive comment. I'm going to ask, Murtaza, if you can take a look at the comment in the chat from Albert, kind of pour over that and see if if you have any response at this point to, I see a couple questions in there from Albert. Albert would be happy to, Mirza will come on in a moment or two and try and speak to that as much as possible. But yes, and then David, yes, certainly the technical and the economic side are important overall. So again, wanted to reflect on a kind of key question that we asked early, part of framing for tonight's conversation, what you really see as opportunities for those first steps. What could be those first steps that can provide some immediate benefits here? And again, we say first steps at immediate in the knowing that we're looking at a very long-term perspective, right? As many as out to 20, 30 years to decarbonize our region. So what might be in the first few years, I guess, when we say immediate? What are some of those immediate steps in the first few years where we can start to see some meaningful results and get us good progress in moving forward overall? So, but with that, let me ask Mirza, if you don't mind coming on. I know we're kind of taking a look. I know Albert had kind of an extensive, looks like some commentary and questions here. I don't know if any thoughts, anything you can share.
Yeah. So appreciate that. A little bit look back at history, at how we've been funding and implementing smart growth policies. The analysis, once again, I want to kind of emphasize that this is the reason I'm saying analysis are not recommendations, because we don't have recommendations from the county. But the analysis shows from the transportation that projected annual emissions through mid-century under current transportation emissions reduction strategies. In other words, we take everything that every city is doing and we take all our collective emissions projections all the way through mid-century, they would be inconsistent with the level of reduction required under the governor's executive orders. And we looked at a multiple array of executive orders in the transportation sector analysis. And we found that it will not meet those standards. So therefore, there's a lot more that needs to be done on transportation side. And particularly, I think what you're referring to is the connection between land use and transportation. There is a pretty significant mismatch in how we've grown, being auto-centric with, dependent on internal combustion engines. But at the same time, we got to also think of the fuel mix and the fuel that will sustain how our growth patterns are. So these are good questions to have in the discussion for recommendations. And if there's any money that is being left on the table for funding, we should definitely look into how we can tap into those funding sources.
Mm-hmm. All right, very good, Mirza. Thank you very much. So wanted to also, and Albert, thank you for the question. Yeah, it's kind of bigger. There's some major policy and infrastructure directions happening or not happening in some cases in our state. And so it's important to make those connections and think about, how our decarbonized region, does or does not relate to those efforts, what the connections are. And if there are not connections, what connections should be made? So thank you for that question and some comments you have. And then Melanie, thank you again for another comment. I know you had a reaction here about these first steps. And so frequency of public transit, understood, absolutely. More useful as an alternative to gas-powered vehicles. So reducing emissions by creating more opportunities and options and frequency and convenience of public transit that we have today as a starting point. So very much thank you for that. So good. Again, want to ask as well. So just I'm kind of cycling through the questions on the screen to remind you. We'd love to hear more from all of you. Now's definitely the time to weigh in. If you have specific questions for our team, now is the time to weigh in with those. Or again, thoughts and reactions and responses to the questions we've been posing tonight. Now's the time to do that. So we appreciate everything everyone shared so far here tonight. So, but yes, thank you. I see the comment as well about air pollution monitoring, particularly in communities with some of the greatest impacts. And that certainly involves partners at the San Diego County Air Pollution Control District. They are now an independent government agency in our county. but certainly partner still closely with the County of San Diego government and all governments, all jurisdictions in our county. So I appreciate that comment. I know that was a comment that Brian brought up earlier too, so thank you. So yeah, it's another example of where that broader collaboration in our region needs to continue to happen as well. So, so thank you for that. Any additional? Yes, Sonia, thank you for the question in the chat about further public engagement. I'm going to speak a little bit more about next steps and continued engagement, because the public engagement does not stop now, this month or at the end of, again, the public comment period on May 31st is about just the technical findings. We have much more to come overall. We'll talk more about that before we wrap up tonight, about what that would look like. So, so the short answer for now is yes, more public engagement coming. So then Melanie, also great question as well. We've got, yes, we've got some very technical language, right? In RDF, decarbonization alone, that term is tricky, right? For many people to understand and comprehend. So what can we do into more easily understandable and relatable? Absolutely, I think it's safe I can speak on behalf of the RDF team. There's all the technical work happening, but on the other side, it's also the communication side. There's more to come in terms of taking a lot of this technical information and putting them into terms and statements and materials that are going to be relatable and understandable to any and all community members, no matter where they come from, what their understandings are, their language, their culture. We were gonna, I know this team's going to continue to work to break through those barriers, those communication barriers as they may be. Overall. But so Melanie, thank you for your bringing that question to the fore, and we welcome any thoughts and ideas about how to again to continue to extend our reach and connect with people in ways that are meaningful for them, right? How can decarbonization, how can that be meaningful to people in their day-to-day lives, and in their futures as well for their families? So absolutely, thank you, Melanie. Very important question. So. Good. Any other questions or comments or thoughts? Again, I'll tell you what, as more come in, let me highlight a couple. Please do submit those comments and questions now, but let me highlight a couple other things about process, kind of related to the question that Sonia just asked about, well, how are we going to stay engaged? First of all, again, I do want to clarify. So again, May 31st for comments on the technical report. And that's going to help inform, we want your comments to help reflect to the policymakers about what all these technical findings mean. And so again, the comment was just put in the link was just put in the chat by Joey Nielsen. There's an engagement platform where you can get in and connect and find that the technical reports and provide your comments. So again, we want to stress that comments on the technical reports by May 31st. So please do that. Please share that widely. We appreciate that. And then also too, more about broader public outreach and related, Sonia, to your question, and I know some of you are asking as well, what will be the ongoing process overall? And so working from the left, we've had our sector workshops, so those are completed, but these community gatherings, that's like tonight's meeting, right? These continue as you see the dates continuing on from tonight, May 17th, roughly monthly, right? As you can see through into the fall. So please stay tuned, make sure you're signed up for email updates from the project so you get more information as those dates come online. Some of them, the next upcoming meetings are available for registration and that's available. But the community learning sessions, direct engagement meetings, these are all opportunities you can connect with the project team through the project website, the engagement tool, but also through the Zero Carbon email address provided. And then there'll also be the community pop-up events. The project team will getting out to where people are at farmers markets and street fairs. And again, particularly, and I know there's great significant attention to those underserved communities as well, kind of going to where the people are to connect with them as well. So any and all ideas that any of you have about what that can look like, what are some of those events? We'll be happy to hear those as well. So that's all going to be ongoing, but definitely as we look into early 2023, the regional convenings for implementation is where, excuse me, the kind of these, as we've been calling them, the implementation pathways become more real, and we engage policymakers more directly in those to start to explore what are commitments that our policymakers across all jurisdictions, not just the County of San Diego, but all jurisdictions, are willing and wanting to make together to start to shape our path forward to decarbonize. So that's again a quick reminder about what we'll be undertaking. So, and again, wanted to acknowledge, thank you to Melanie. More thoughts about engagement, faith-based organizations, yes, for connecting with hard to reach community members, underserved communities. We know in many communities that a local pastor, imam, representative of a faith organization is a trusted source. So we'll certainly explore how we can connect with interfaith communities to help make those connections and draw in a broader audience. Thank you for that. And then I see in grassroots organizations, B, thank you very much. Absolutely, there's more of those community-based organizations that have reaches into communities, issue-specific, neighborhood-specific, interest-specific, and particularly many community-based organizations that reach those whose voices are not typically heard or as frequently heard. So, so yeah, Sonia, thank you. The regional interfaith acts, that's fantastic. Yes, perfect example, I think, of an organization we should connect with. I know the team's making note of that right now. So you're continuing to be an example of a great source for us. Thank you so much. And then Albert, your question about a public vote on a proposed action plan. Mirza, maybe you can come on and speak to that a little bit more, but just to start that response, I think it's safe to say, and Mirza will again clarify here, but any sort of kind of vote on policy direction will start with the local jurisdictions, and I don't know that we know exactly yet what that'll look like. But Mirza, what are your what's kind of any expectations or thoughts or ideas as to what that may look like in terms
Thank
of
you, Albert, for this suggestion. I've been to quite a few of these city council meetings, and they're quite enthusiastic, most of them, about next steps. Let's do something. Let's figure out. And at the same time, they're kind of cautious about somebody imposing something on them. So we have to walk this together with respecting the authorities that each of the municipalities have, and to have a regional conversation. Sometimes the word regional means as if it were a unified entity, but in the context of San Diego, it works because there is a conglomeration of different entities, multi-jurisdictions, and overlaid with a single water agency, a single utility provider, a single transportation agency. So there's if you will, an ecosystem of authority here that USD's EPIC has brilliantly done an analysis of that authority on climate action that shows that there is a lot of room for each of us to do a lot more, even with the authority we have. So therefore, we want to walk this together, make sure we bring along everybody. And when we reach the point of, do we need some kind of authority, I think we need to answer that question together with us all in the room.
Right, yeah, when we have a better sense as to what does implementation look like. Mirza, is that your point? That may inform, what sort of how and where will decisions be made? Where does that authority lie? Is it with existing jurisdictions? Are there other considerations? Does it require a public vote? So, so a lot of considerations to still come forward to help inform that. Yeah, Albert, thank you for the question. Yeah, helpful. So, good. Again, I want to remind everybody, now is the time. If you have comments or questions tonight on anything we've covered, we've been posing discussion questions here on screen to spur your thoughts and ideas. Now is the time to please submit those. I do anticipate, as I kind of keeping an eye on the clock, I think we'll be able to wrap up before 8 o'clock tonight. So don't sit. I want to stress for anybody who's saying, well, I'll wait till 7:55 to submit. Please don't do that. Please go ahead and submit those questions and ideas now. We want to be able to hear them sooner than later to make sure we have time to respond. So, so good. So yes, please, any last comments or questions tonight? Please do submit those now. Yeah, Albert, thank you. Absolutely, it's a regional issue. We could not agree with you more. And as much as the County of San Diego is currently sponsoring this effort as it's been defined so far, it is absolutely intended to be and needs to be fully collaborative, with all jurisdictions in this region to be a success and to have impact. So absolutely, thank you very much. So good. So thanks for all the comments tonight. And I want to acknowledge too, as Brian just noted, the horizon out to 20 years from now is 20 plus years is too far. We've heard too far out. We need more immediate action sooner. We need outcomes and change to happen much sooner. That we don't have time to waste on that. So so I see Mike Bullock, another advocate of that point. We've heard many times over, I think. Thank you, Mike, for being here again tonight. Let me go ahead. You should be able to unmute. What did you want to share here tonight, Mike?
Well, I think how you set up a framework has always been the question from the very start, because all of the cities have autonomy and they don't want to be told what to do. The closest thing I see to anything like a regional framework is, of course, Sandag. And even there, they can't direct the cities to do anything. They have the power of the purse. They have the power of what things get built in cities. So they have some power over the municipal governments. I don't see there's no framework that exists, and I don't see how a framework could be set up because the cities don't want to do that. And I would say the cities are not even obeying the law that was established when the first lawsuit against the county's climate action plan was concluded, because there was an appellate court ruling that was published, and that set legal precedent. And the most important legal precedent was, I don't know if anybody knows this or says it, but that climate action plans must have enforceable measures to achieve meaningful results. Now, I'm sorry about the meaningful results. That's vague and that's unfortunate. Enforceable measures, I think we understand what that is. And the climate action plans are supposed to have be within CEQA law. CEQA law requires an environmental impact report. And the most important environmental impact that we're talking about here is climate destabilization. That's an environmental impact. Climate destabilization is not discussed in any way, shape, or form in any city's climate action plan. They just don't go there. And I've attended Sandag meetings. I've had my 3 minutes to speak, and I've been very clear that they should, in their last environmental impact report for their last regional transportation plan, they needed to go in and discuss and level with the public about this very interesting and rather large environmental impact, destabilization. It results in mass starvation. They don't say anything like that. So the municipal governments don't want to obey a reasonable interpretation of that law that was established by precedent. Meaningful results means climate stabilization. I'm sorry, it didn't say that explicitly, but what else is meaningful if we're going to destabilize the climate? Anyway, those are my comments. Thanks.
Great. Thank you, Mike. Well, we're to your point about the cities not wanting to engage or having limited engagement, and Sandag's kind of involvement. This process at least is trying to provide that space and that opportunity, excuse me, to build an initial framework to start to have that conversation more closely overall. So at least we have this to get things moving here, and knowing that there's much more ground to cover. So excuse me. Also wanted, Murtaza, can you speak to Sonia's question in the chat?
Yeah.
Please?
Oh, sorry, Sonia's question. Oh, okay. Sorry, I'll get to it if Elise can think of that, but I wanted to respond first to Mike's comments. Why should cities be more ambitious than they have been? My response is really twofold. It's partly to do with our own municipal functioning, as climate emergencies, particularly in San Diego, are extreme heat events and wildfires get more intense and frequent. They will consume more of our public safety resources. And this is besides the private sector harm and insurance rates going up. Just in terms of municipal functioning, our cities and the county, our budget will be jumping from one climate emergency to another. So rather than move that way, it becomes salient to think about how do we plan in the long run in terms of our collective responses, and then bring in the question of resiliency, because this almost becomes a permanent state, and adaptation in the sense, well, if FEMA has declared us a high risk hazard area as a county, it's one of the highest risk hazard areas in the nation, then we have to think strategically, what is it that we are doing as the governing bodies of this region. So that's the climate emergency component. And then there's a more, if you will, self-interested component, which is cities and agencies have a better chance of attracting state and federal resources when, in terms of our competitive advantage, when we compete as multilateral and regional with a regional plan. So therefore, both in terms of how we are geographically situated and politically aligned, we can draw these kind of clusters for competitive application for implementation. So that's more of a practical reason, immediate reason, but nonetheless, in the long term, we still have to think, how is climate change going to affect municipal budgets?
Very good. Thank you, Mirza. And then Elise, I know Sonia had the question about kind of electric transportation fleet, and I know that EVs certainly are discussed and studied at length as part of the transportation sector. But you know, again, at this point, there's no specific policy recommendations, implementation pathways yet coming out of this process, but that's certainly a next step. But at least, is there anything else you want to add to that? Or
yeah, just really quickly, the chapter 3 of the technical report talks about, you know, the need for electric vehicles and transportation electrification in circumstances where VMT reduction is not currently possible or may not be possible in the future. For instance, for rural communities where, you know, mass transit might not reach those communities, electrification will be important there. But I also wanted to note that many jurisdictions, including the county, are electrifying their fleets right now. So it's certainly something that is a known and ongoing solution. But again, we don't know what those implementation plans will be yet.
Great, thank you very much. So again, I do want to stress, you know, I think we can wrap up probably in a few minutes here. But I do want to remind, as we have on screen here, and we will, you know, a few seconds, you'll see in the chat the link to the engagement platform, and there it is. Joey's right at spot on money there. We do want to encourage all of you here, just for public comment, just on the technical report. We'll be closing that by May 31st. So again, doesn't end public involvement in this whole process, just on the technical report. So please do weigh in if you haven't already. Take time to pour over those, provide your comments. Again, you're also welcome to ask questions offline as well. It doesn't only have to be in this meeting tonight about, you know, anything you'd like to clarify about what you see in the report there. And the team's happy to kind of engage with you outside of these meetings as well. So, and again, as a reminder about next steps here, our next meeting at this level, this community meeting or gathering, June 28th and then July 26th, right? We have queued up, and you can find links to RSVP for those meetings. We encourage you to share those with your friends and neighbors and colleagues. And again, more community learning sessions, direct engagement, pop-up community events, those will be occurring as requested, and you can reach out to the team through the Zero Carbon email, zerocarbon@sdcounty.ca.gov, as is also in the chat right now. And stay tuned, because we'll be starting to pivot and look ahead this summer to starting to frame what may inform implementation. And we know early into 2023, be engaging more intentionally with policymakers around that and getting their input there. So good. With that, I want to thank everybody for being here. Really appreciate everybody making the time, and want to respect everybody's time here tonight. Tonight was, again, I intended just kind of a check-in, reflect on what we've heard so far. But we have much more ground to cover with all of you to come in our upcoming meetings and sessions. So I just want to offer my thanks. Murtaza, I'll let you kind of close things out with closing remarks before we send everybody off for the rest of their evenings.
Thank you, Andy. Thank you, everybody, for coming. This is a very exciting time for us, because now that we're concluding the analysis portion and beginning the implementation pathways, we are looking forward to seeing each of you there, and we're looking forward to a participation that can actually get into solutions. So I leave this with just a thought that in terms of our future generations, it's not just about us, but about our future. Do we do what we can, and to make sure not just us, but our future generations can live in at least a better quality of life than we do? And that is why we want to work together. We want to spend our time and our collective energy in building that future. So I really appreciate each of you.
All right, well, thank you very much again, everybody, for being here tonight. We wish you a great evening, and we'll look forward to seeing you again at least a month from now at our next community meeting. So again, stay in touch. Please do log in and weigh in on the technical reports before May 31st. And otherwise, have a great evening, and we'll look forward to seeing you again soon. Have a great night. Thank you.